Well, I have the great privilege of introducing someone very special to you this morning. I first heard of Seth Haines, I guess about 5 years ago. I had heard about this great new book that had just been written called Coming Clean. And it was the story of how Seth, as a young attorney, realized that he had become dependent on alcohol. And so he chronicled his journey towards sobriety in this book called Coming Clean. And I read the book, I was so impressed with it, and so I reached out to Seth. He came to the chapel and he ministered to us one weekend, really well received. A few years went by and Seth has recently come out with his second book. It's called The Book of Waking Up. And it's a book all about what it means to sort of wake up from addiction into sobriety. Really readable book. It's divided up into 150-something little daily readings. So it's just I strongly recommend that you pick up the book. So I got a hold of Seth and I said, hey, I think it's time for you to come and minister with us again. This became even more evident when the pandemic started, because I'm convinced that there are many people who have turned to substances to help them cope with the pandemic. So Seth's visit with us today is very timely. So here's the deal. Tonight at 6:30, there's going to be a seminar that Seth is going to be doing on our online campus. The name of the seminar is Pandemic Sobriety. And so he's going to be teaching. There's going to be opportunity for interaction, question and answer through the chat. And so if you struggle with any kind of addiction yourself, whether it's alcohol or drugs or pornography or shopping or gambling or food, like Seth often says, we're all drunk on something. And so if you can relate to that, or if you know somebody who can, if you know someone who loves someone who struggles with addiction, man, they need to be there tonight, 6:30 on our online campus. You can also see it through Facebook Live or through our YouTube channel. It's really going to be an important event. Well, not only that, but we have the privilege of having Seth bring the Word of God to us this morning. And so right now, it is my privilege to introduce to you Seth Haines, attorney and author and speaker, husband of Amber, and father of 4 beautiful kids. Most importantly, though, follower of Jesus. And so would you join me in welcoming my friend, Seth Haines.
In 2020, I walked into a local gym, and there I saw a man who was a podcaster. He's kind of this guy that keeps up with the news, and he's a basketball aficionado like I am, and he was at my son's game. And I sat down next to him, and we started talking about this mysterious virus that had sort of swept across the world. He'd been talking about it on his podcast. He'd been writing about it a little bit. And I said, hey, Jeff, man, at what point do we call this a pandemic? And he looked at me and he said, I think we're getting pretty close. We left the gym that night, and that is the last time I would see him for several months. In fact, the first time I saw him again after that conversation was just like 3 weeks ago, and we were both masked up, and we were in a socially distanced gym now, again watching my son play basketball, very sparse crowd. And all of these restrictions, all of these new ways of being and living life had sort of fallen over the world. And I looked at him and I said, hey, man, you remember that conversation? And he kind of laughed and he said, yeah. And I said to him, I suppose we were already in a pandemic. We were already sort of in the end of the world, and we didn't even know it. I am Seth Haines. I am an attorney. I'm a writer. And I'm a friend of the chapel. I love you people. I've been with you before. You may remember that I came and talked about the issues and the idea of real, true, spiritual sobriety. That seems like an eternity ago. Everything was different in the world. You could actually still shake hands, if you recall that. You could hug people. You could go see your Nana if she was sick in the hospital. Everything was different. I could travel to you. And here I am today speaking to you, not with you, not face to face, not standing shoulder to shoulder with you in the worship service, because I can't travel, can't come to your state, can't risk spreading infection from my state to yours or taking it from yours to mine. Everything here is absolutely insane. It's different. It's a different world we live in. In the weeks after I had that conversation with Jeff, the world absolutely caught fire. I mean, you sort of remember, don't you? Businesses started closing. Some of you probably were on the business end of a closing. People were losing jobs, losing their coffee shops, losing their restaurants, bars, retail establishments. Anyone who was involved in any sort of retail or service establishment was really hit hard as businesses closed because the government didn't want to spread the virus. In your neck of the woods, hospitals were overrun. I spoke with a hospital administrator from New Jersey just a few weeks back, and she said that it was absolute chaos finding enough workers to come in and sort of take the place of those who got COVID and had to extricate themselves from the hospital scene. Finding enough N95 masks, these special protective masks that the hospital workers wore, was very difficult. And supplies were running thin and they weren't fitting right. Everything had changed. Travel from across the globe had slowed down or shut down in some degree. And we couldn't even, cross state lines. I had friends who were stranded in Florida on vacation because Tennessee wouldn't let them come back. Everything changed. It was a crazy world. And probably the craziest thing that you might recall is that toilet paper supplies ran thin. People started fighting over these things like they were the next hot, Christmas doll that you had to buy for your child. I'd never seen anything like it. You've probably never seen anything like it. And, it was one of those moments where there was just collective fear and collective anxiety in the air. I've talked to some of my friends about this over the last few weeks, and we've just sort of been just kind of taking 2020 apart. It's been a hard year. 2020, you had COVID, which we've already talked about. You had the racial tensions that exploded after the death of George Floyd. And now we're in the middle of this really hotly contested election season where, as of today, we still don't have a result. We still don't know what's going to actually happen. And to me, as I've talked this out with my friends, it feels like 2020 has been a massive stress test. And not just a stress test for America, it's been a stress test for the entire world. The world has, to some degree, ground to a halt. And you can feel the sense of anxiety and panic in the air. This sense of panic and anxiety is so palpable, in fact, that it's actually wreaking havoc on our mental health. According to the American Psychological Association, 60% of adults feel the issues facing us are overwhelming. 60%. So that means 60% of you, right now, 6 out of 10 of you watching this talk, this moment here at the chapel, are struggling somehow to really make sense of the world around them. Too much data, too much information, too much anxiety, too much stress. It's overwhelming. According to the same association, 1 in 5, so that's 20%. 20% in the United States say that mental health is worse today than it was at this time last year. So there has been a palpable change in mental health from one year to the next, 2019 to 2020. And if you'll recall 2019, people were saying that was a tough year. So we've had a slow, increasing decline in mental health stability over the last year and probably over the last several years. 92% of millennials say that COVID has negatively impacted their mental health. 92%. That's more than 9 in 10. So chances are, if you're a millennial watching this, you would say, yeah, man, COVID has totally impacted my health. If you went out to the local coffee shop or maybe stood outside in the line at the self-serve line at your local coffee shop, if you have those in New Jersey, and you spoke to a millennial, they would say, yeah, man, this whole thing has totally impacted me. I feel more anxious, more depressed. There's more pain in my life. There's more uncertainty. There's economic uncertainty. There's family uncertainty. There's social uncertainty. Everything in my world is upside down. What's the result? Well, we know that when anxiety and depression and stress are on the rise, so are addictions, ways of coping with that stress, that anxiety, and that depression. There's been a 34% increase in alcohol consumption, according to some reports, 20% increase in smoking, a 17% increase in vaping, and a 16% increase in non-medical drug use. And, I keep up with a lot of the literature on anxiety and stress and depression and addiction and how those things interrelate. And we've seen an exponential increase in opioid use throughout 2020, through COVID, through the racial tensions, through this election season, because anxiety and stress is on the rise. And if you follow the opioid crisis and epidemic at all, that we were already sitting at astronomically high numbers. So what we see is that in this season, we are on the edge. We feel the pain. And there is this way in which we're trying to deal with it. We're dealing with it by drinking more, smoking more, using more opioids. Some of us may be shopping more, compulsively clicking, filling the cart. Some of us may be addicted to porn. Some of us may be addicted to sex. There are any myriad of addictions, some socially acceptable, some not, that we might try to use in this time of stress, in this time of anxiety, to help us cope with the uncertainty around us. One thing is certain. In these last 2 months of 2020, and as we head into 2021, you will have pain. You will have stress. You will have anxiety. Why? Because you're a human living in perhaps the most stressful time, the most anxious time that we've ever lived in. And one other thing is certain. Because you're human, when you feel anxiety, when you feel stress, when you feel pain, you will turn to something to numb that pain, to anesthetize that pain. You'll turn to something to numb the fire that you feel in your brain, that you feel in your fingertips. You'll do anything just for a minute to get rid of that stress, of that anxiety, of that pain. Those things often lead to addiction. I know this because I have struggled with my own addiction to alcohol. 8 years ago, in fact, I was coming out of a really difficult season in which I thought I was going to lose my son. We did a long stint in Arkansas Children's Hospital. He made it. But on the backside, there was a lot of stress, a lot of anxiety, a lot of pain. And it was really hard to live this sort of day-to-day existence of is my son going to be okay? Is he going to make it? Is he not going to make it? And so what did I do? I turned to the bottle. I drank hard. I drank and I drank and I drank and I drank to numb the pain, to sort of allow myself to fall asleep to the pain. I know what we do. I've done it. This is a very normal human experience. There are some great writers who have written about the connection, the nexus between pain, anxiety, stress, and addiction. One of those is Dr. Gabor Mate. He's worked with heroin addicts for a long time. And in his work with heroin addicts, he's come to one conclusion. And this is how he writes it in his book, In the Realm of Hungry Ghosts. Addictions always originate in pain. They are emotional anesthetics. He goes on to write, the question for the addict is not why the addiction. The question for the addict is why the pain. And I've written about this in my own book, The Book of Waking Up. This is a little bit of a shameless plug, maybe. At least it feels that way. I don't know. I can't tell how you're reading it because I can't see your faces. But allow me to read a little bit of my own experience from the book of Waking Up. We all know the old saying, two things are certain in life, death and taxes. Our fathers, mothers, accountants, preachers, and drinking buddies have all said it. And though I don't like adages as a general rule, this one rings true, though I might simplify it. One thing is certain in life, pain. What is tax day but a day of pain? What is death but the culmination of pain? And I suppose if there's another thing that's certain, it's that humans will try their darndest to avoid, numb, or kill the pains of life. Doesn't everyone need a drink on tax day? Don't we run opiate IVs into our arms on our dying day? And for the record, when I end the end of my days, hook me up, Buttercup. We all know that when there's pain, we do our best to avoid it. We do our best to sleep to it. You know, if we can only just sleep a little bit longer, if we can only just be numb, be out of it just a little bit longer, maybe we'll wake up and all of these issues will have sort of evaporated, gone away. And maybe we'll wake up and the world around us will be different. It'll be tolerable again. Unfortunately, that's not the way the world works. You don't get to wake up to a new reality where, unicorns and leprechauns are dancing in fields of clover and angels are singing and everything is utopia. The world does what it does. It spins into chaos. It produces pain. The world does what it does. It creates anxiety and systems that break and fall apart. It produces viruses. It produces death. It produces despair. And so the question isn't how can we avoid the pain? The question isn't, how can we numb ourselves to it or fall asleep and hope to wake up to something better? The question instead is, what is the thing that we can attach to? Who can we attach to that will help heal our pain and bring us to a new reality? I come from a tradition, and there are many traditions in Christianity that use what's called the lectionary. And the lectionary is a series of readings that's spread out over the course of many weeks in a year, a calendar year, so that you read certain passages on certain Sundays. You might read one gospel passage, for the season leading up to Christmas every year. Sometimes they change. You may read certain epistles at certain times of the year. And it just so happened that as I was preparing for today, apropos of everything, the lectionary passage was from Matthew 25. And as we'll see, those are the words of Jesus that say, stay awake, keep watching. But before we dive into that passage, I want to give you a little bit of background. In Matthew 24, Jesus is talking to the disciples, and they're asking him about the end of the world, the apocalypse. Now listen, I didn't necessarily want to preach an apocalyptic message, but after this last week, it kind of feels like maybe I should. So I'm going to go with it, and I hope you go with it too. As Jesus was talking to his disciples, as he was kind of explaining what the end of the world would look like, here's what he said. He said there would be wars and rumors of wars. Nations would be against nations. In other words, there would be deep political unrest. There would be famines. There would be earthquakes. There would be increasing lawlessness. The love of people would grow cold. And if you ask me, I kind of feel like we've seen that in 2020. And we've seen all of these, things, these nations rising against nations. We've seen the fight among and between nations, even just in the COVID era. We've seen the ways that the love of the people of America have grown cold one to another. We're all divided. We're all looking at each other with suspicion, one political party against another. We've seen increases in crazy weather events. I mean, we had 3 hurricanes this year, all striking down in the Gulf. I mean, it was insane. it feels a little bit like the world is falling apart. As I said earlier, like we're in a stress test. And so the words of Jesus should ring really true to us. It feels like things are falling apart. And after he explains the reality of the world, the reality of the end of days, of the potential apocalypse, and by the way, I'm not saying that we're heading towards the end of days or apocalypse, but as he explains this sort of anxiety that fills the world, he then turns to a parable, to a story. Here's the parable. And this is from today's lectionary reading for those of you who come from those more liturgical backgrounds. In Matthew 25, he says, "Then the kingdom of heaven will be like this. 10 bridesmaids took their lamps and went to meet the bridegroom. 5 of them were foolish and 5 were wise. When the foolish took their lamps, they took no oil with them, but the wise took flasks of oil with their lamps. As the bridegroom was delayed, all of them became drowsy and slept. But at midnight, there was a shout. 'Look, here is the bridegroom, come out to meet him.' Then all those bridesmaids got up and trimmed their lamps. The foolish said to the wise, 'Give us some of your oil, for our lamps are going out.' But the wise replied, 'No, there will not be enough for you and for us. You had better go to the dealers and buy some for yourselves.' And while they went to buy it, the bridegroom came, and those who were ready went with him to the wedding banquet, and the door was shut. And later the other bridesmaids came also, saying, 'Lord, Lord, open to us.' But he replied, 'Truly I tell you, I do not know you. Keep awake, therefore, for you know neither the day nor the hour.'" The call of Jesus in this parable is very clear. Be ready. When the world around you is uncertain, when you don't know when the bridegroom is coming back, and remember, he's talking in this apocalyptic context, when the world around you seems chaotic, be ready. Stay awake. Be ready. Have your oil in order. Don't be drunk. Don't be passed out on the side. Don't be lost. Be ready. Be watchful. Have the light ready so that when the bridegroom comes, you can be face to face with him. The apostles knew this teaching of Jesus very well. And in fact, both Peter and Paul talk about it sort of time and again throughout their own writings, throughout the epistles. And particularly in 1 Thessalonians, Paul addresses this idea of staying awake. And he addresses it again in an apocalyptic context. In 1 Thessalonians 5, he's talking again about sort of the end of days, the end of the world, the anxious time that precedes the return of Christ, as Paul is writing. And he's saying, like, things are going to get hard. It's going to be tough. There's going to be stress. There's going to be pressure. And here's what he says. This starts in verse 4, 1 Thessalonians chapter 5, verse 4. "But you, beloved, are not in darkness, for that day to surprise you like a thief. For you are all children of light and children of the day. We are not of the night or of darkness. So then, let us not fall asleep as others do, but let us keep awake and be sober. For those who sleep, sleep at night, and those who are drunk, get drunk at night. But since we belong to the day, let us be sober and put on the breastplate of faith and love. And for a helmet, the hope of salvation. For God has destined us not for wrath, but for obtaining salvation through our Lord Jesus Christ, who died for us, so that whether we are awake or asleep, we may live with him. Therefore, encourage one another and build up each other, as indeed you are doing." I love this passage because what Paul is doing is showing exactly the point of how we use addictions, how we use alcohol, how we use other things. He's saying, don't be drunk. Don't try to salve the pain of the world, the stress of the world, the anxiety of, hey, when is Jesus coming back? With some lesser form of love, like alcohol, or in our modern context, Twitter and social media, or maybe watching the news incessantly, or perhaps, shopping too much, or looking at porn, or whatever the thing might be. So many ways to be drunk. We're all drunk on something. Don't bend to those addictions, is what he's saying. He's saying, don't be drunk. When you do those things, when you bend to these addictions, you're actually giving in to the darkness. But we are children of light. And so what does he say? He says, stay awake, be sober. So what does it mean to be sober? That's the question. We're going to talk about that more tonight. There is a seminar that I'm doing with the chapel, and there'll be more information about that. But tonight we're going to talk about what does it mean to be truly and spiritually sober. But let me give you a very high view of what I mean when I say sobriety, and what I think the scriptures mean when Paul says, be sober. To be sober is to be awake to the world around you. It's to not try to numb the pain, to not try to avoid the pain, but instead to take that pain directly to Christ himself and to say, I feel this anxiety. I feel this stress. I see the world around me devolving into chaos. And instead of giving into that anxiety and trying to numb it with some numbing agent, instead of trying to be drunk or over shopping or overeating or over sexing or over whatevering, I'm going to come to you and ask you, Lord Jesus Christ, Son of God, have mercy on me. Be with me in this pain. Calm my anxieties. Help me to know that my help comes from you. True sobriety is about attaching not to the lesser loves, but attaching first and primarily to Christ and to Christ's love. So how do we do that? That's a great question. Again, we'll talk more about that this evening. But for now, here's what I want to leave you with. The world will do what the world will do. It will produce chaos and anxiety. It will tempt you to numb that chaos and anxiety. It will create pain. So here's how you can be prepared. Here's how you can stay awake. First, recognize the things that cause pain. How do you do this? Well, I would say the first step would be carve out about 20 minutes, maybe 30 minutes. Sit alone with a pad of paper and maybe a pen, and just make a pain list. Here are the things that are causing me anxiety and pain and stress right now. Perhaps it's the COVID situation. You can't go see your family. You can't go to your favorite restaurants. You haven't been on a date in months. Maybe you've lost someone to COVID. Maybe someone's struggling in a hospital right now in your family. Maybe it's racial tensions. You might be a person of color. You might feel the pressure and the stress and the anxiety of a system that seems to discount or dismiss you. You might be a person who is saying, I went all in on this particular political party, and now it looks like that party is falling apart. Or I went all in on this particular party thinking that somehow it can fix all the ills of the world. And will that happen? I don't know. I don't know what your political affiliation or sort of bent is. We all have our own. And in your church, there are varying different political parties, certainly. Maybe that's causing you anxiety. Maybe it's something even simpler. Maybe it's not COVID related or racial tension related or election related at all. Maybe it's the stress of sort of figuring out how you're going to pay for your kids' college, or maybe it's the stress of a difficult marriage or a terrible relationship with someone in your family. I mean, life does what it does. It produces stress. Make a list of those things. Top of mind, top of heart. What are the first things that come to mind that are creating pain in your life? Once you make your pain list, Move to the next list. List 2. What are the things that you use to sort of numb the pains of your life? It could be alcohol, opioids, food, whatever the thing is, begin to make a list. And some people say to me, Seth, I can't really identify the one thing. It may not be one thing. It may be several. Maybe it's Netflix and cereal binge at the end of every night. You know it's not good for you. You know it's not healthy, but you do it anyway. Why? Because you just got to get your mind off things, right? So make that list, whatever it is. And here's a hint. When you're trying to identify those things, ask yourself, what is the one thing that I couldn't live without? And then write that thing down. If that doesn't do it for you, maybe it's what's the one thing that I think about from the time I wake up till the time I go to bed. And if that doesn't do it for you, ask yourself this. At 3 o'clock in the afternoon, when my willpower is low and I'm bored and I'm tired and I'm stressed out at work, what is the thing I crave more than anything? And begin to write those things down. Now, once you have your pain list, once you have this sort of list of the things that you're prone to use to numb the pain, ask yourself this. When the need arises to use the thing, can I put it aside? Can I turn and stare intently towards Jesus and ask, Lord Jesus Christ, have mercy on me. Be with me in this moment of pain. If you'll do that, I promise, I don't understand it, I don't get it. It works. I promise it works. That's what I did when I was coming out of my season of over drinking, when I was having all the stress and pressure and anxiety, when I didn't even know what to believe anymore about whether there was a God, whether he cared about me. I looked at the things that I was addicted to alcohol. I put it aside and I said, Jesus, come be with me. Lord Jesus Christ, Son of God, have mercy on me. Be with me in this pain. And what I found was day after day, I got something a little bit closer to God. It works. It'll work for you, I promise. It's about primary attachment to God first. There's an old spiritual writer named Ignatius of Loyola, and he created this entire sort of program for spiritual direction to kind of really get to know Christ more. And in his program for spiritual direction, which is called the Spiritual Exercises of St. Ignatius, he had this principle and the foundation. And the principle and the foundation said, we were made to love, serve, and reverence God. And God put everything in this world, everything that's created, to draw us deeper into loving and serving and reverencing him. Human as we are, though, we tend to misuse those things. So to the extent that we don't use the created things of God to love, serve, and reverence him, we should put them aside and we should refocus our efforts on getting to know him. In other words, if we put alcohol over God, we should reorder our attachments, put the alcohol aside if we have to, so that we can primarily attach to him. And that's the idea of true sobriety, recognizing the anxiety, recognizing what we use to quell that anxiety, and putting it aside long enough to reattach primarily to him, to be awake to him, to be sober for him, so that when he comes back into the town, and we're those bridesmaids who are waiting for him, we are ready to see him. We are ready to feast with him. We are ready to banquet with him. At the end of that Thessalonians passage, it's very important that Paul sort of leaves us not alone. And he says, hey, encourage each other. Encourage one another to stay awake. And that's what I'm here to do today. I'm here to encourage you to stay awake. But, I don't live with you guys. I don't live in New Jersey. I don't know most of you. And the sad fact is, because we're doing this on video, I won't get a chance to talk to a lot of you. So it's up to you to encourage one another. I can encourage you for today, but what about Monday? What about Tuesday? What about a week from now, a month from now, 2 months from now? What about when the world gets more chaotic? I won't be here, but you'll be there for each other. And so remember that your primary job in all of this is to encourage one another. Encourage, encourage, encourage. You are not children of the darkness. You are children of the light. So stay awake and be sober and be primarily attached to God. One of the ways you can do that in encouragement is, as you work through these exercises, call a friend and say, hey man, I'm really feeling this stress or this anxiety. And maybe this isn't a classic addiction, and maybe I'm not really addicted, but I am using this, again, Netflix, social media, the news, alcohol, opioids, whatever the thing is. I'm using this to sort of ease that tension, to ease that pain, to escape. And I don't want to do that anymore. Instead, what I want to do is I want to primarily attach to Christ, to God. I want to have that relationship that allows me to be ready for a better day, for the feast day. Call a friend. Make sure you're doing that. Stay in touch. And together as a community, you can create this sort of network of awakeness, this network of sobriety, of support. If you'll do that, I promise it'll change your life. I promise it'll change your community. And I promise you it'll change the way you think about addictions. Tonight, I hope to further change the way you think about addictions. Tonight, we'll delve deeper into what is pain. We'll delve deeper into what is addiction. We'll delve deeper into what does it mean to truly be sober? What does it mean to be awake? And I hope you'll plan on coming. It'll be an online seminar. I hope you will come with your questions. And maybe I'll have a few questions of my own. Maybe you can give me some answers. But I hope you'll come together because, again, in community, in a community of encouragement, we can find better ways to make it through this season of chaos and anxiety and stress. So, with that said, thanks for listening to me. I know it's kind of weird to be listening to some guy you don't really know who's from Arkansas, in Arkansas, set against some weird white studio. But I appreciate it. And I hope that, if you're watching this at home in your pajamas with your hot cup of cocoa or coffee or whatever, that it's brought some little amount of encouragement to you. And I hope to see you tonight. So thanks for listening.